I gestured at this. What is important right now, especially for your audience and for people like you, is we have to counter this narrative, because what is being generated right now is, and to use Noam Chomsky, is a manufacturing of consent for genocide. We had Major Mike, I think his name is Mike Lyons. He was on CNN. He was asked by Anderson Cooper, who's like choking up when talking about what's happened to Israelis. He was asked, what is it going to take, a ground invasion? What would that look like? He's like, the collateral damage would be thousands, tens of thousands, potentially hundreds of thousands of Palestinians. And there was no pushback, no questioning. He said, this is the amount of collateral damage we have not seen since World War II, which the world came together after and said, this sort of violence can never be repeated. And they established a list of laws and saying, these are laws we must abide by in contexts of war to ensure that people don't die at this level again. Okay? It's being predicted and encouraged by someone on CNN, the so-called liberal, human rights oriented platform, right? Which is, I say that tongue in cheek, but this is the platform that's at imagine a Palestinian or whoever, someone who's supporting Palestine, say, hundreds of thousands of Jewish people in Israel will die.
Right.
And that's collateral damage. And, they got to do what they got to do. How that feels to hear that? It's terrifying. It really is terrifying to hear, and especially the frenzy across the media, right? The rape stories, 40 babies being beheaded. You know what I mean? What is that meant to gin up? That there is no bounds for the response that must be inflicted on the babies in Gaza.
Yeah.
Right? So if you decapitate their heads, it's proportional. That's what's being generated. And to have and all of these politicians, all of these media figures, all of these corporations issuing these statements, right? That's what's happening. Is the same form of consent that was manufactured around Ukraine. I remember when the Ukraine stuff happened, when the Russian war broke out, I was like, man, I don't remember in my life ever seeing a propaganda campaign being waged in the way. You'd be driving down the streets of Texas highway and you're seeing Ukraine flags, and corporations would literally say, we'll match our employees' donations to go to military supplies in Ukraine. Okay. I remember saying to myself, wow, I don't remember the last time a campaign of manufacturing consent occurred around a war since the war in Iraq. And I even thought at that moment that maybe this was crazier. Maybe it was more frenzied than the war in Iraq. But obviously I was much younger, the post 9/11 era. But anyways, it feels very reminiscent what's happening now, right? To say, and you could see the vilification of Russians is similar to, you can totally, Russians as people, Russian flag, all of that. They're also now, there's no off limits when it comes to those. You can attack these people as those people.
Right. It's not about the government. It's about the people. Right. Yeah.
Right. But what's different here is, unlike Russia, who is a military and is a superpower, the Palestinians are defenseless, caged people. Okay. So you're about to massacre. They're in the process of massacring Palestinians. But I will tell you this, and this is why Palestinians, when you want to say why do Palestinians turn to armed resistance? And I want to talk about resistance, if you don't mind.
Yeah, of course.
So for Palestinians, this is an existential situation. Okay. It's not as though we need, because, there's this what happens among Zionists is let us define Zionism. What is Zionism? They say, Zionism is the self-determination of Jewish people and their historic homeland, right? But that's not Zionism. That's a definition of Zionism that's in the abstract, that is not grounded in the historical record and the present reality. We know what Zionism is. Palestinians do. Zionism for Palestinians is mass expulsion. It's massacres. It's siege. It's occupation. It's war. It's deprivation of rights, deprivation of land, deprivation of resources, and deprivation of our a fulfilling life. That's what Zionism is for us. We know what Zionism is. We know what it's entailed for our people, for our ancestors. We know what it means to us. And we know that its confrontation with us as a people is existential. There's a land here and a people present. There's another people who want that land without the people. It's pretty simple. And what's crazy is the West Bank, for example, for like religious Zionists, right-wing Zionists, actually Judea-Samaria, what they call Judea-Samaria, which is the West Bank, is more important to them in terms of theology and biblical history than like what you would say the coast, the Tel Avivs, where they see the liberal bastions are. They want the West Bank. That's why there's this push on the West Bank for them, right? They're openly declared what they want. Smotrich said it. You have three options. You submit, you die, or you leave. Or you're expelled. Those are your three options, Palestinians. Okay? So when someone tells you that, are you going to say, let me hold up a sign? Are you going to say, let me appeal to the international community, which is blocked by the US, International Court of Justice? Let me establish an NGO and advocate and do a social media campaign? There's obviously Palestinians who commit themselves to a nonviolent orientation, and I support a diversity of tactics when it comes to Palestinian organizing. I mean, it's not like I'm engaging in military. My conduct is nonviolent. I engage in protests and stuff like that. But you would be crazy to tell Palestinians in the face of the most fascistic right-wing government, don't do anything back.
Right.
So Palestinians, what stands in between total annihilation for Palestinians by this government, this fascist government, what stands in between them and that is armed struggle for them as a people. Self-defense, right? And it's wild because I live in the state of Texas where there's more guns than people almost, okay? And people walk around with guns everywhere here, right? There's such a normalization of that in this state. And yet, like when Palestinians, the notion that they may defend themselves, that they might fight back, that's already assumed off limits. And here's the thing, like occupation under international law established through the post-World War II era stipulates that occupied people have a right to resist through armed struggle.
Okay, yes. Occupying power. This is so important. I think that you constantly hear people saying, doesn't Israel have the right to defend itself? And the truth is that Palestinians are the ones with the right to defend themselves.
Absolutely.
Under international law.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah.
No. Palestinians under international law have the right to defend themselves. But even if there was no international law, you're going to defend yourself if you're facing. But you're right. No, but if you're facing an existential context, right, where someone's telling you, I'm going to drive you out of your country, you're going to defend yourself, and you have a right to defend yourself. And I want to talk also to put into context, and this is me putting on my analyst hat, okay? Like, let me just analyze the situation. Not as an advocate or a promoter or anything like that. Let's look at the context. It's an asymmetrical context. You have a people who literally manufactures rockets in a ghetto, okay, with makeshift materials, including reusing the materials of bombs that were dropped on them by the Israelis, okay, whose rockets are indiscriminate. Nobody denies that. And in fact, one of the spokesperson for the resistance factions in Gaza once said, listen, y'all don't want us to fire rockets indiscriminately. We're with you. We want to be discriminate in where we fire our rockets. We want to target military sites. We want to target tanks and soldiers and stuff like that. Give us those weapons.
Right.
And we'll be happy to do it. Right. But right now, I'm manufacturing the weapon in a garage in a ghetto, right, with makeshift equipment and materials. That's what I'm doing. That's what's at my disposal. This rocket that 90% of which is intercepted, at the very least, it's a deterrence, right? Because it's an inconvenience for the people of Israel, right? It's an inconvenience. It's largely what it is. Obviously, people die from rockets. I'm not going to deny that. But at the very least, for Palestinians, this is what stands in our way. Kidnapping soldiers, which, in my estimation, what happened most recently. I don't believe that, Hamas anticipated that it was going to be open the way it was. I think they anticipated meeting confrontation with Israeli military. I think their goals were probably to capture a few soldiers, to take them back, to exchange them for the thousands of Palestinian prisoners who exist in Israeli prisons, right? To engage in a prison swap. I think that was their goal. And so this goes back to for Palestinians, the only avenue for us to have our prisoners of war, these are prisoners of war, released, is to capture an Israeli prisoner, right? Israeli soldier. You have to understand, 1,200 of the Palestinians of the 5,000 in prison haven't been charged with a crime.
Yeah.
They don't even know what they're accused of. They're just told you have to admit to what you did, and there's nothing to admit to. So for Palestinians, this is the asymmetric war. So for me, like what I tell people who support Palestine, there's some people who are like, I acknowledge that Palestinians are victims. I acknowledge they're living in an open prison. I acknowledge that they're under occupation. But that's the only way I could actually see them. If they do anything beyond that, it's off limits for me, right? And I tell you, okay, so you tell me as a Palestinian, what should we do? If you believe in the cause of Palestine, if you believe that Palestinians have a right to resist their occupation, you draw out the strategy for us. Write out the plan, please. Let us know what is the path that you think, if we followed as a people, will achieve our goals. And if the answer is, I don't have one, then what are you doing? You have these writers, so-called left-wing writers, say, oh, what if they just did this peaceful march, right? What if they had a Gandhi for them, right? As though that hasn't been tried. As though 2018, Palestinians were systematically
I was just
disabled.
That.
Disfigured systematically, right? As though that hasn't already been tried. So what's reinforced to us, there's a wing of the progressive movement that can stomach Palestinians as victims, but nothing more than that, right? They can't stomach them as humans, both imperfect, who make mistakes, who engage in conduct that's excessive at times, right? Who are essentially a colonized population that are engaged in an anti-colonial struggle. They can't stomach that. Even though if you study any anti-colonial history, any anti-slave revolt, any actual rebellion against a violent system, it's only ever occurred through violence, right? And the ones that don't actually achieve their end goal, like if we were to take apartheid South Africa, this is what I want to say about apartheid South Africa, because they always tried to hold this up. Look, the ANC engaged in violence, this, and that. Well, go to South Africa today. South Africa is one of the most unequal societies. It's probably more similarly unequal as to what it was under apartheid. The Bantustan still exists. They're just shanty towns. They're essentially refugee camps of Black people. The white South Africans still control the majority of the land, still control the majority of the corporations. And that is what a compromise led to. That the South African population is still largely a victim of a repurposed system. One that, instead of divides things black and white, now has allowed the entry of some Black people into an elite class, but still maintain the dominant order. That the haves, mainly whites, and the have-nots, right? So like these systems, and I think Zionism, because sometimes Zionism is framed, purely as like a land issue. Zionism is about the allocation of rights, resources, land, privileges to a certain group of people at the expense of the other, right? And that is true. That's why I think we need to understand, like when we say systems of oppression, it's the same. Anywhere you go, it's about the allocation of rights, resources, land. Who gets to have, who doesn't.